Duluth told her to stay away from that cabin, especially in winter. But a 7 months pregnant woman named Hannah Collins didn't believe in warnings or winter ghosts. Her late aunt left her that house in her will, so she went. Only Hannah and her loyal German Shepherd Ranger stepped foot inside that abandoned cabin on the hill. Yet the moment Ranger began clawing at the frozen floorboards, Hannah realized her aunt hadn't left her a gift. She had left her a message. What they uncovered beneath that ice would shake the entire city. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. City, state, country. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Winter morning in Duluth, Minnesota, the lake wind knifed sideways through bare birches like a living warning. Hannah Collins stood in front of the old cedar cabin. Her late aunt left her in the will, her beige wool coat barely holding back the February bite. She was 7 months pregnant, belly round and low, like a calm moon waiting for its own tide to turn. Hannah was 32, 5'6", with milk-pale skin that freckles easily, and hair the color of warm chestnut. When the sun hits, though this morning it looked darker because of the wet snow clinging to it. Her face was soft but sharp at the same time, soft around the cheeks, sharp around the eyes. Those eyes were storm gray, the kind that always looked like she just remembered something painful, then decided quietly to endure it. Anyone who met Hannah would assume she was resilient. They would not be wrong. She had grown up in Grand Marais, further up the lake shore, mostly raised by this Aunt Elaine, because Hannah's parents were chaotic drifters who rarely stayed anywhere longer than a season. Elaine was the only person in her life who ever represented a real roof, a predictable room, a steady winter that returned every year instead of a bus ticket to another state. When Elaine died 6 months ago, colon cancer, Hannah found the grief was not loud but slow. It was grief like snow falling, small, falling endlessly, covering everything with silence. That was why she decided to return to Duluth. The cabin deed appeared in the will like a hand reaching out from the past. For Hannah, that meant maybe the universe or Elaine was telling her, you can start here, not run again. Beside her now was Ranger, a 7-year-old German Shepherd with a sable coat black along the spine and warm brown along the ribs. Ranger weighed about 80 pounds and had that muscular, athletic, wolf-like geometry that made strangers step back, though he himself was completely gentle to those he trusted. He wasn't just a dog. He was the witness to her loneliness, her nurse on those nights. She woke up to panic attacks after the father of her child, Mark Halper, left without a trace. Mark was 38, bearded, tall, and engineer with brilliance and emotional coldness, fused like ice and steel. His leaving was the exact moment Hannah stopped believing safety came from any man. Ranger was the only loyal male in her life, if she was honest. Ranger trotted ahead now, through the snow, breath steaming white. He paused by the front steps, looked back at her, perked ears forward like he was saying, this is ours now. Yes, Hannah touched her belly gently with both mittened hands. Easy, little one, she whispered. If this house has secrets, we need to step gently. She inhaled the icy air and thought she tasted pine sap and old wood smoke. Duluth was quiet today, too quiet. From here atop the hill, she could see a slice of Lake Superior gray and shimmering like cold iron waves pushing under sheets of floating ice. She felt like the lake was watching her, almost like the lake remembered her aunt too. She put the key into the rusted front lock. The lock did not fight her. It turned too smoothly like someone had oiled it recently. Hannah frowned. Her aunt had been dead half a year. Who would have oiled this lock? She stepped into the foyer. It was dark, dust soft, cold, but not the abandoned cold she expected. It was the cold of a house in the middle of breathing. Ranger patted in behind her nose, twitching tail, stiff body alert, not aggressive, just attentive. He knew this wasn't just a house. He always felt things before she did. She whispered, I know, boy. I feel it too. There was a faint smell, not mold, not rot, but something metallic, almost like old keys and pennies. The living room was small, with windows on the east side. Snow glare from outside turned everything blue-white. A rocking chair sat by the window, a green knit shawl draped over it. Hannah froze. She recognized that shawl instantly. Elaine had knitted it when Hannah was 19. It was warm, heavy, soft. It had smelled like cinnamon and cedar. Hannah reached out to touch it, but something in her chest stopped her hand. Ranger gave a soft whine as if to tell her, don't yet. She let her hand fall to her belly instead. The baby shifted in answer. She suddenly remembered her aunt's last phone call, before she got too sick to talk. Elaine had whispered, "Some houses are not bought. They choose." Hannah always assumed it was poetic nonsense. Now her skin rose with goosebumps. She swallowed hard. She never believed in hauntings. She believed in grief that lingers, trauma that can seep into walls, memory that can hang like a smell. She believed some places remember us. Ranger trotted toward the back hallway. His nails clicked softly on the floorboards. He stopped suddenly and looked back at her ears, upright, head tilted, his body half pointing toward the basement door. Hannah whispered, "No, not yet." She made herself breathe steady. She didn't want fear to be the baby's first inheritance. She stared at the shawl again. She whispered, "Aunt Elaine, why did you leave this house to me?" Outside, the wind hissed against the glass like a warning or a welcome. Hannah understood something with terrifying clarity. She hadn't come here simply to receive a house. The house had summoned her. And it wasn't done speaking yet. The electricity would not be turned on until tomorrow, the city said. So Hannah lit the old stone fireplace in the cabin, using the emergency fire starter she carried in her backpack, and the flames snapped sharp like winter applause. Ranger sat close to her on the old rug, posture tense but loyal, his amber brown eyes reflecting the firelight like twin lanterns. Hannah could feel the baby shift beneath her ribs, slow, heavy like a turning tide searching for a shore. She could not stop thinking about the shawl draped on the rocking chair. It should not have been here. And yet it was the one object in this whole dark house that felt warm, as if the fibers themselves still held her aunt's breath. When the fire settled into steady embers, Ranger rose abruptly and moved toward the living room doorway. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just froze, one paw lifted off the floor like a statue of alertness. Hannah followed his gaze. The floorboard near the center of the room, the one with a darker grain, shifted slightly as if settling. She kneeled down, belly heavy, breath thin, and pressed her hand against the wood. There was a hollowness beneath it, curious, not normal. She used the handle of her snow boot to pry it up gently. The board lifted easily, revealing a shallow cavity in the subfloor. Inside lay a small tin box, the metal dented and old, its blue paint almost fully worn away. Hannah's heart thudded once, then twice, slow and fearful. She opened the tin box. Inside was a folded black and white photograph of Duluth City Hall, the version from decades ago before renovations modernized the facade. On the back of the photograph was taped a small hand-drawn map, pipelines, junctions, and feeder valves, clearly water main schematics. Next to it was a slip of paper, yellowed and fragile, written in cramped handwriting. It read, "Do not let Lake Superior cry again." Hannah swallowed. Ranger, standing close, sniffed the air, then pressed his head against her shoulder, as if reassuring her. Hannah leaned back against the couch, her back aching from both pregnancy and tension. She thought about her Aunt Elaine. What had she gotten involved in? Had Elaine been hiding something all these years? Had Hannah accepted more than a house? Had she accepted a burden? Her thoughts were interrupted when someone knocked. Ranger didn't bark. He just stiffened like stone and moved in front of her, protecting. Hannah opened the door to see a woman in her 60s, bundled in a plaid parka and knitted red hat. The woman's skin was pale and lined like cracked ice hair, white and wiry under the hat. Her eyes were small but alert, the eyes of someone who watches everything in her neighborhood because she does not fully trust anyone. She introduced herself as Mrs. Iris Kemper. Iris said she lived 2 houses down the hill. She explained in a gentle but blunt voice that she had known Elaine. Iris wasn't tall, maybe 5'2", and had the build of someone who once lived a physically demanding life, perhaps farm work or years of labor. She spoke calmly but sharply, the way someone speaks when they always say exactly what they mean, and never soften their words just to be polite. "Your aunt was stubborn," Iris said quietly. "She never wanted to leave this house. But toward the end, she kept telling me she could hear music in the walls, not hallucinations, not sickness, music. Like a piano faint, like someone was practicing downstairs." Hannah's fingers tightened around the doorframe. Iris looked over Hannah's shoulder into the dark house, and for a moment something like worry passed over her features. Then she leaned in slightly, voice dropping. "She told me the house remembered things. She told me she was keeping something safe. And she said if anyone new ever stayed here, they needed to be very careful." Hannah's pulse throbbed in her ears. If she hadn't found the tin box earlier, she might have dismissed Iris as a lonely old woman spinning superstition. But the map was real. The message was real. The city's water mains were real. Hannah thanked Iris for coming and said she was still settling in. Iris nodded and left a jar of honey, dark forest honey, and walked back down the snowy path with slow, careful steps. Hannah returned to the fireplace. She spread out the photo and map on the coffee table. Ranger lay next to her and rested his head on her knee. Hannah placed her right hand on her belly. The baby responded with a small kick, as if reminding her life keeps moving forward. The fire crackled softly. Then very faintly, Hannah heard it. The sound, a single low note, not wind, not the house settling. A tone like a piano key pressed softly somewhere inside the walls. She felt her breath shake once. Ranger's ears flicked upward. Hannah whispered, "Aunt Elaine, what were you protecting?" And in that moment, she knew one thing clearly: she was not leaving this house. Not yet. She would find out what her aunt died keeping hidden. She would follow that sound wherever it led. Morning arrived pale and brittle, the sunlight watery and thin, like it had been strained through frost. Hannah had barely slept after hearing that single piano note in the wall. Her mind kept circling the same questions like wolves around a fire. What was her aunt trying to keep safe? What was hidden under the city, under the lake? And why did a message in handwriting she did not recognize demand that she not let Lake Superior cry again? She was sipping instant coffee near the window when Ranger suddenly lifted his head from the rug and stalked toward the front door. His hackles rose. His teeth did not show, he didn't growl. He simply formed that rigid posture that meant, prepare. Seconds later, someone knocked. Hannah opened the door just a crack. Outside stood two men in identical charcoal coats, the kind made of thick wool that old East Coast bankers wear. Both wore flat-brim hats, too clean, too deliberate. Black felt like they chose them to appear neutral and respectable while hiding everything underneath. The first man was in his early 40s, tall, with a sharp jawline and light stubble trimmed with obsessive precision. His nose was narrow and straight, his eyes a cold blue that did not blink much, the eyes of someone who spent years learning how not to reveal fear. His voice was professional, but it had the kind of practiced warmth that felt artificial. He introduced himself as Mr. Cole Astor, and he worked in property compliance for the county. The second man was younger, late 20s, thin olive-skinned, with dark hair combed neatly, his smile soft but eyes restless. His name was Mr. Nathan Yazdi, he said, also from the county office. He looked like someone who once dreamed of being an artist, but ended up working in paperwork because life pressed him into the safest corner. Nathan had the posture of a man who did not enjoy confrontation, while Cole felt like someone who fed on it. Their eyes scanned past Hannah's shoulders. The older one, Cole said politely, "We simply want to verify there are no old hazardous materials left in the structure. Some of these confiscated homes contain volatile items." Hannah kept one hand on the doorknob and the other on her belly. "My aunt owned this place for 30 years, she replied evenly. "What kind of hazardous material could be left here?" Cole did not blink. "Sometimes personal effects can be hazardous." It was an answer that was not an answer. Ranger stepped forward, then shoulders squared. The men's eyes flickered, not fear but calculation. Cole cleared his throat gently. "We won't take more than 5 minutes of your time, Mrs. Collins." Hannah straightened her spine. "I'm not letting anyone inside until I see paperwork." Nathan held out a white envelope sealed. Hannah hesitated, then took it. When she looked back up, the two men were already stepping off the porch boots, leaving clean black wet prints on the pale wood. Ranger watched them until they disappeared behind the snow-heavy pines. Inside the envelope was nothing. It was completely blank. Hannah felt her skin prickle. This was not inspection. This was warning. That afternoon, she drove to downtown Duluth, leaving Ranger home because the snow was now falling thick sideways, and she couldn't risk him slipping on ice while she tried to waddle her pregnant belly all the way across a slick parking lot. She needed someone who could help her interpret this. She remembered a name her aunt mentioned once, someone who wrote about city scandals, someone who did not bow. The Duluth News Tribune. She walked into the newsroom with her coat dusted white from snow. At the front desk sat a young woman with bright red lipstick and hair dyed silver blonde, flipping through print proofs. She waved Hannah toward an open office without even asking what she needed. Inside that office sat Ethan Parker, a journalist in his early 30s, then about 5'11", with dark hair cut short and neatly parted. He had a few days of stubble which did not look sloppy. It looked earned, like the kind of stubble a man gets when he stays up late chasing facts that never wanted to come quietly. Ethan's skin was pale, like most Duluth residents of Scandinavian ancestry, but his hazel eyes were warm with a natural patience. There was a heaviness behind his eyes, though. He had the gaze of someone who had been lied to by people in power more times than most people could count. Hannah introduced herself. Ethan listened without interrupting. When she showed him the map, she braced herself for him to laugh or dismiss her or tell her she was imagining danger, because she was anxious pregnant alone. But Ethan did not laugh. He stared at the photo, and then his eyes sharpened. "These look like real city water mains," he said quietly. "And this junction? This one here was retired 10 years ago after a waste pipe burst under Canal Park. They sealed it and swore everything else was safe." He looked up. "Do you know how many fishing advisories the lake gets every year now? Do you know how many unexplained contaminants have been reported from shoreline wells?" Hannah blinked. Ethan leaned back, folding his arms. "Your aunt was protecting something. She was involved in something, and this is not the kind of thing to ignore." Hannah took a deep breath. "I have one condition," she whispered. "If this is an investigation, give me a good ending. Something worth my baby being exposed to this mess." Ethan smiled, not cheerfully but respectfully. A promise smile. "I don't bow," he said simply. "Not to money, not to offices, not to men in fancy coats." Hannah felt the baby kick. A fierce kick. Like agreement. A new melody formed in her chest, not fear, not yet something sharper. "Purpose," she whispered. "Then we begin here." Snow fell hard over Duluth that afternoon, thick and relentless, so dense that the city looked like someone folded the whole world in half and tucked it under a blanket of white. Hannah felt the weight of winter pressing into the wooden bones of her aunt's cabin. Ranger sat near the door ears, flicking at every gust of wind as if the storm itself was delivering messages. Ethan Parker returned just before dusk with his laptop in a messenger bag and a folder of printed public records. He brushed snow out of his brown hair, crossing the living room with that lanky posture of a man whose body has spent too many years bent over keyboards. His coat smelled like cold metal and newsroom printer ink. He set up his laptop on the kitchen table, and for nearly an hour he and Hannah cross-referenced the hand-drawn map they found with archived infrastructure plans on the city's digital database. The more they compared, the more something ugly took shape. The pipeline junctions, those old feeders and retirements, the ones the city claimed were sealed decades ago, did not match the real street grids. Someone had redrawn these maps after the fact. Someone had erased the original truth and replaced it with a lie printed on public record. Ethan clicked into a folder with environmental reports. His jaw tightened. Here he muttered, pointing to a 10-year-old inspection report from a company called North Shore Utilities. The report was conducted by a man named Martin Greaves, a mid-level environmental compliance inspector from the state's Department of Natural Resources. Hannah saw a photograph of him attached to his signature, a middle-aged white man with sandy blonde hair, a short box beard, and a look of exhaustion around the eyes. You could tell he was the sort of man who used to believe in something, but had been slowly crushed between rules and bribes. Ethan scrolled further. Greaves wrote concerns about contaminants leaking into the bay, he said. He recommended immediate suspension of that old waste conduit. The next page had red stamps on it. Rejected. Closed. No further action required. Ethan exhaled once sharp through his nose. He warned them. He tried. Hannah felt a tremor of rage under her ribs, a heat that mixed strangely with the cold fear inside her. Ranger suddenly stood up, tail stiff, nose pointing toward the back hallway. He gave a short bark, not aggressive, more like an alarm. Both Hannah and Ethan followed him. Ranger led them to the narrow crawl space under the stairs, the one they hadn't opened yet. Hannah knelt, ignoring the way her belly made everything awkward, and she pulled the small hook of the crawl space hatch. Cold basement air wafted upward. Ethan found a lantern in one of the kitchen drawers and lit it. Ranger went down first, every footstep deliberate, like a soldier clearing a room. The basement smelled like wet stone and slow rot. The dripping sound was rhythmic, like a clock measuring guilt drop by drop. Hannah kept one hand braced against the wall as she descended. Ethan held the lantern up high. Against the far concrete wall was an old wooden shelving unit. On the bottom shelf behind dusty paint cans lay a cassette tape recorder and 3 unlabeled TDK tapes. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. Are you kidding me? Ranger picked up one of the tapes gently in his mouth and carried it toward them like a retriever bringing back a bird. Hannah took the tape and her hands trembled because in that moment she felt time collapse into itself. Her Aunt Elaine, dead 6 months, had been preserving evidence. Hannah wondered if Elaine ever tried to blow the whistle, if someone threatened her, if Elaine had died because of this. They brought the tapes upstairs. Ethan searched the living room drawers and miraculously found an old cassette player with working batteries. He clicked the tape in, white hiss, then a man's voice, low, strained whispering. It was the voice of Martin Greaves. He sounded afraid but determined. North Shore is bypassing the EPA sensors. They routed waste into the retired line. Superior is taking the runoff. They think no one will see. Hiss. Silence. Then the recording cut off suddenly like the tape was torn or someone yanked the machine away mid-sentence. Hannah pressed her hand against her belly. The baby kicked so hard she groaned. For a second she actually laughed, half in pain, half because the absurdity was unreal. You pick peaks in the plot, don't you, little one? Ethan's face was pale. This is criminal, he said. This is conspiracy. This is harm to the lake, harm to people. This is not sloppy bureaucracy. This is an intentional cover-up. Hannah sat heavily on the chair. Ranger placed his head on her knee again, his way of grounding her always. I don't want my kid to be born into a world where we close our eyes, she said softly. Ethan looked at her seriously. We need someone inside city government we can trust. Someone who isn't bought. He took out his phone and hesitated. I know one person. She's not perfect, but she hates corporate corruption. She owes me a favor. That was when the phone rang. The landline in the hallway. The old rotary one that hadn't been used in years. And the sound of it ringing felt like the lake itself suddenly woke up and screamed. Ethan froze. Hannah stood up slowly, one hand on her belly, the other reaching toward the phone. She lifted the receiver. Silence. Then a single piano note played through the line, clean and low, and the line went dead. Hannah set the phone down carefully, her pulse hammering in her throat. She looked at Ethan. We're not imagining this, she whispered. This house knows. Ethan didn't argue. He couldn't. Outside, the storm raged, wind slapping the windows like a furious god. Ranger leaned closer against Hannah's legs. And despite the fear, despite the cold, despite the storm, Hannah felt her heart expanding. Bigger than fear, bigger than the danger. And she whispered to her child inside her, to the lake, to the house, to the dead aunt, whose voice seemed to echo in the walls, we're not backing down. The morning the article went live, Duluth woke under a sky that seemed washed clean. The lake glittered silver beneath a sun that rose like it had no more patience for lies. The Duluth News-Tribune placed Ethan's expose on the front page in bold type, and every screen in every diner along Superior Street flickered with the headline. Hannah sat at her kitchen table, the baby resting low and heavy inside her, and realized she was breathing easier than she had in months. No black sedans appeared. No flat-brim hats. The world did not collapse into retribution. Instead, her doorbell rang. Mrs. Iris Kemper from down the hill arrived first, her small frame lost inside her oversized plaid coat, her cheeks red and wind-bitten, holding a warm loaf of banana bread. Her thin lips trembled when she told Hannah, "Thank you. I never told your aunt, but I think she wanted someone younger, someone strong enough to finish what she tried to start." Behind Iris came the O'Malley brothers, tall red-headed twins in their 50s, with big shoulders, rough hands, and matching fisherman beards the color of rusted maple. Their faces were weathered by lake wind and the years of hauling nets in winters that kill weaker men, but both had gentle eyes. They left jars of smoked herring in her hands and said only Lake Superior deserves better than what they've done. A college girl came after them, a Lucy DeVore, 19, petite black with silver nose ring and curls dyed blue at the ends, studying environmental science at the University of Minnesota Duluth. Lucy shook Hannah's hand, her voice breathless with excitement, telling her that Hannah helped prove corruption that Lucy had been researching but couldn't get anyone to publish. Lucy said her professors dismissed her because she was too emotional about water justice. Hannah almost laughed at how small that phrase sounded compared to the roar of the lake that morning. Later that afternoon, a city council member came. Not one Hannah knew personally, but she recognized the woman from campaign posters. Councilor Maribel Costa, mid-40s Latina, with jet black hair in a low braid and cheekbones sharp like cut stone eyes, dark with the kind of caution earned through surviving politics. Maribel had been a single mother since 22, and every inch of her posture said she had been underestimated more times than she could count. She stood in Hannah's kitchen, still in her navy wool suit, steam from her coffee, fogging her glasses slightly. "This scandal will not disappear," Maribel said, "but you blew up the lock, and I swear to you I will not let anyone close these doors again." This was a woman who did not bluff. Hannah believed her, and Ranger sensed it too. He lay down and relaxed beside Maribel's feet, his tail gently sweeping the floor in a slow rhythm of acceptance. By evening that same day, neighbors began to gather casually, some with casserole dishes, some with jars of preserves, some just with stories. It snowballed, people showing up at the cabin with questions, wanting to help, wanting to learn. So Hannah picked one Saturday and announced on a handwritten sign taped to the maple tree outside that she would host tea and cocoa afternoons to talk about water stewardship, and children could come play with Ranger in the yard. Ranger, now having earned himself local fame as a detective dog, became the mascot of this quiet new movement. He was 7 years old, but still had the noble poise of a younger animal. Powerful shoulders, sable coat glossy under the winter sun, eyes bright as amber. He slept next to the fireplace during gatherings, his heavy breathing like a warm drumbeat at the center of the room. Ethan came often, not always with a notebook, sometimes just to sit in the corner and listen to the neighbors talk about their lake, their town, their losses, their fears, their hopes. Hannah noticed that Ethan smiled differently now. Not the tired half-smile he used when reporting, but something truer. He was lighter, as if he had let the lake teach him something like forgiveness, not for the powerful who poisoned it, but for himself, for the nights he had convinced himself that truth didn't matter. One evening, after Lucy had demonstrated how to test nitrate levels in thawed snow, and after the O'Malley brothers left a crate of smoked trout on the porch, and after Maribel Costa called to say the state attorney general had launched a formal inquiry, Hannah stood at the doorway of her cabin. She placed one hand on her belly, the baby rolling lazily inside like a small star in orbit, and she thought of her Aunt Elaine. The shawl over the rocking chair still carried her aunt's faint scent, cedarwood and cinnamon. The house felt different now, not haunted, not anymore, not a monument to secrets, but a place relit, rewarmed, rehumanized. The baby gave a small kick, soft, almost affectionate. Hannah whispered, "We made it, you and me, and this house." Ranger pressed his head against her calf. She stroked his fur. She knew storms would return. In this town, winter always returned. Corruption always tried to find another hole to hide in. But she also knew something deeper. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to walk forward with fear beside you. She had learned that from the lake, from Ranger, from the cabin that remembered. And as she watched the sun drop behind the frozen water, bathing the snow in gold like a blessing, she understood the final truth. This house had not cursed her. This house had waited for someone who could listen. In the end, this was never just a story about pipes, water, or a haunted house. It was a reminder that sometimes miracles don't fall from the sky like fireworks. Most miracles look ordinary. They look like a woman choosing to stay and fight instead of running. They look like a neighbor bringing bread. They look like a pawing at the truth. They look like a small light turning back on in a dark house. Maybe God still speaks in these tiny ways, through the stubborn heartbeat of a lake, through the courage inside a pregnant woman who refuses to be silent, through a community waking up together. Maybe heaven's greatest magic is simply this love multiplied into action. In daily life, each of us meets silent battles like this. We walk past injustice because we feel too small, too tired, too busy to push back. But God did not create us to be silent shadows. He placed a fire in us to protect the vulnerable, to guard what is pure, to do good, even when no one sees. So if this story moved you, even just 1 inch, do something simple right now. Leave a comment, share this video, hit subscribe. Let this small flame reach another soul. Because sometimes God uses ordinary hands, yours, mine, to finish the miracles He started. May God bless every viewer here today, and may He give you courage to do the good thing, even when the world tells you to stay quiet.